Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and in this video I want to have a look at the seven liberal arts, the school of Chartres, or how cathedrals such as Chartres were universities, libraries, ancient theme, because whether it was in the Greco-Roman world, places such as the Temple of Artemis, or way back to ancient Egypt with the Library of Alexandria, but prior to that, and more importantly, Heliopolis I did a series on Heliopolis, so I'll put the link in the description. But for instance, Chartres Cathedral in France, it's pretty much the holy of holies when it comes to this great cathedral architecture. The great cathedrals were the first buildings to rival the Great Pyramid in height, but they are also an important feature, hollow buildings. They had paper-thin walls, they were full of light, so whether it was Greco-Roman temples, which were just really pillars with beams running across the top, they were quite dark on the inside, or the pyramids, which were great buildings, but really just stone stacked on top of each other. The great cathedrals, or the Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque going back to the Pantheon in Rome, was a whole different type of architecture. It was a great step forward, buildings flooded with light and hollow. But whether it's Chartres or all these other ancient cathedrals, what you will see is the references to the masons who built them. So when the cathedrals were being built, various cities were in competition with one another to attract masons and the craft guilds. So it wasn't just the masons, stone masons, it was also carpenters, metal workers, glass makers, and the various cities would compete with one another to attract the workers. These workers were then able to negotiate their conditions, and so even with these early craft guilds, such as stonemasons, carpenters, they were able to negotiate their working conditions, and it was like an early form of trade unions where the conditions, wages, etc., were negotiated with them. So these workers had power because they had a rare set of skills, and the feudal, or actually like the bishops who were in competition, they were untouchable power, but they had to negotiate with these masons. So this is a stained glass at Chartres again, stonemasons, but you'll see the compass as well, these themes, and also these measuring tools that they use, which is a constant theme. So the seven liberal arts, well, there is a strong connection still to this day with Freemasonic symbolism, but the seven liberal arts is essentially an ancient system of education. So you have the seven liberal arts, which are really divided into the trivium and the quadrivium. Trivium as in tri, and quadrivium four. So the trivium was grammar, dialectic, which is logic, and rhetoric. As where the quadrivium was music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, and I'll explain that in a moment. But there are different, that's why they were separated, and it was the quadrivium which was considered the higher of the liberal arts, but also the aspect, because it's unlike the trivium, the quadrivium is very scientific, very black and white truth in that sense. Here are some images from throughout the recent centuries of the seven liberal arts, and so you'll see music, the compasses with geometry, arithmetic, etc. Also notice that little instrument there, the sundial, timekeeping. Here are some earlier from the 15th and 15th century. But again, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy or astrology, because, well, there is no astrology without astronomy, logic, rhetoric, and grammar. More recently, you'll still see it in stained glass. So wisdom is better than strength, but again, grammar, dialectic, logic, rhetoric, geometry, music, astronomy, and arithmetic. Here are two more examples. Again, grammar, arithmetic, dialectic, rhetoric, music, geometry, and astrology or astronomy. But also, I'll get to this later, but this symbol here and this one here is another example. You'll notice that even these earlier sort of medieval, early Renaissance sort of periods, Socrates and Plato, and the importance of these ancient philosophy books going back. But even books such as the 10 Books of Architecture by Vitruvius, the works of Hieron, which are speak about the sciences, also the philosophy of architecture, but also the machines of architecture, which were essential in building these great cathedrals. Here's another example of a 7 liberal arts. One more again, measuring tools, the tools of geometry, the tools of astronomy, music. One more again. Okay, so here's another example again, music, geometry, astronomy, all those aspects in there. And this was an education system, and so like now when you think the liberal arts, it's got attached to a whole other thing, but the liberal arts was an education system, and it was that you needed to learn each one of these to be a wholly educated person, to have a wide education. But also the interesting thing about it was that they would interconnect. So without geometry, you couldn't really understand astronomy. Without music, arithmetic blends in with that, and then through geometry and arithmetic, astronomy, music, they all connect. It's sort of like if you learn one, you essentially have to learn the other, and especially if you look into Pythagorean music and harmonics, and how these very interesting numbers 108, 216, 432, 864, etc. are embedded in ancient texts from the East, all through the ancient world and in the Bible as well, and are still being used by this small handful of architects and sculptors who get the big jobs in this channel. I've covered so many different cities, individual buildings, and they always return to this, and a very strong connection to the esoteric and just generally Freemasonry. But also that will include Rosicrucians, Theosophists, and these other type of organisations. Chartres was not alone. Clermont-Ferrand was another. So on the north portal, again you see the 7 liberal arts centred there. And it tends to be that either arithmetic or geometry are considered the highest of all. So you have the trivium, the quadrivium sits above, and depending on who but geometry or arithmetic will generally be considered the highest of the liberal arts. So back to Chartres and Masons. Like Chartres Cathedral, for instance, the 377 feet, whether you can find this in ancient stone across the ancient world, for instance, Temple of Artemis was 377 feet long. That's a Fibonacci number, which relates to the golden section. You'll see that the same use of specific numbers, but also incorporating units of measure, which would most, Wikipedia will tell you is relatively modern. No, they're actually very ancient. It's embedded in these buildings as well. It's measurable, it's tangible. I could measure anything and find the foot, let's say. But to find the foot at 144, which is a Fibonacci number, or 377, which is a Fibonacci number, this was by design, and also you'll see throughout. Well, it's either you accept it or you don't. What can I say? So this is one of the doors here in Chartres, and it's a Christian cathedral, but we have here Pythagoras, one of the fathers of geometry, for instance, Pythagorean theorem. 3, 4, 5 triangles, for instance. Now Euclid is another. Euclid's Elements is a book that's very old. It's the world's most distributed published book. Some would say the Bible or Quran, but everyone, whether it's Hindus, Islam, Buddhists, Christians, and Jews, all return to Euclid. And so Euclid Elements is the universal Bible. Let's say it's a book of geometry. And so also embedded in here we have the 7 liberal arts. So the School of Chartres was a university as well as a church. It was a storehouse of knowledge, and it was passing on information. So again, just like Heliopolis in ancient Egypt, or these other centres of temples. So School of Chartres, the 7 liberal arts. Now this is again, the School of Chartres 7 liberal arts is no secret, so you can find it on like Wikipedia. If you just lots of great material in regards to this. Again, if you just the 7 liberal arts School of Chartres and look back into even ancient periods, most of them will say that the 7 liberal arts was a medieval invention. Well, no, it actually goes back at least to ancient Greece, and just like with the Salamis stone, the allegedly modern English foot goes at least back to 500 BC, and that connects to the other aspects of measurement which are linked to time. So it wasn't just Chartres, Cologne, Liège, Clermont-Ferrand, and these other places. These cathedrals were centres, and they're also usually centres of measurement, so all the mile markers would be measured there. I just did a video recently on Notre Dame Cathedral, literally a 0 mile marker just outside the front door. And so at that time we didn't have formal universities like we do now, but here's a question. So what are the 7 liberal arts? And so we can really divide them into the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And so it's, again, all these things are more complicated. In a short YouTube video you can't really do it justice, but the skills of the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, would be a good example of the skills used by lawyers, for instance. You have to form an argument and you're dealing in grey areas. The trivium is, look, it's like law and morality. This is, and how to construct an argument, debating skills. This is a essence of a trivium. These are, again, grey areas. You know, someone who's really skilled can make a great argument for something they don't believe in, because what is moral truth? Well, this is a eternal question, but this is one why the trivium might be considered the lower, because it's dealing with, well, grey areas of life. It's got very much connections to how to interpret the law, for instance. Has where you have the quadrivium, music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. Well, they deal with the measurable. They deal with the black and white. So it's Ernest Rutherford. That which is not measurable is not science. That which is not physics is stamp collecting. Well, you know, it's a bit strong, but it's basically true that the sciences, the pure truth, is something you can measure, you can observe, you can experiment with and repeat. This is why the quadrivium would be considered the highest of the liberal arts, because it's dealing with, again, measurable, tangible, repeatable truths, and these will all connect with whether it's Nuar-Fuzi, Hermes, Mercury, Thoth, Shesset, gods of knowledge, maths, architecture, alchemy. We'll touch on that in the it's have to be in the next episode. But they are gods of weights and measure, what you can weigh, what you can measure, tangible truths that you can sink your teeth into, as where they're not to be debated. Essentially, it just you can prove them. Okay, so here's another example of 15th century, the 7 liberal arts. But also I've just highlighted that with 7 planets and 7 metals. So this will be another connection. I know we're going to finish this in the next couple of minutes, so I'll have to split this into a couple of episodes. I'll do it straight away, and it'll be posted very shortly after this video is available. This will be a connection between the 7 liberal arts, stonemasons, cathedral builders, but also alchemy and astronomy as the 7 planets, 7 metals. So, geez, have a good one. The next episode will be up very shortly after this one. Cheers.